A very warm welcome to our presentation. My name is John and I will be your host. Today we're going to be talking about dealing with stress. It is commonly known that stress is recognized as the major cause for physical illness and mental illness and all sorts of associated conditions. And it has really become a pandemic with regards to how it is affecting people's quality of life. We're going to look at what stress is, what stress does, and then we're going to look at how we can deal with stress. Before we start, just a few things I just want to address. I'm going to be using a comprehensive PowerPoint presentation, the reason being that the majority of people learn visually, so it's important for them to see and hear the presentation. Secondly, should anybody have any questions or queries, you are more than welcome to direct those to me. I will give you my contact details at the end of the presentation. What is stress? I'm going to read a definition by the ADAM Medical Encyclopedia. Stress is a feeling of emotional or physical tension caused by any event or thought that makes you feel frustrated, angry, or nervous. In other words, a feeling that has got a negative impact on me in making me feel frustrated, angry, or nervous. In other words, I experience a negative emotion as a result of the thought or the event. Stress is your body's reaction to a challenge or demand that you feel unable to cope with. And we're going to explore what is meant by the body's reaction in the sense that there is always a biochemical reaction in my body to what is going on in my mind, and in particular with regards to times where I feel unable to cope. In other words, when I'm thinking negative thoughts about a situation. Stress can be positive, such as when it helps you to avoid danger or meet a deadline. So not all stress necessarily is negative. Some stress can release just enough stress hormones to make me feel alert and aware to be able to make decisions. We're going to focus on what is referred to as negative or harmful stress and how to deal with it. A stressor is the stimulus or the threat that causes stress. So there is the experience of stress, which is the negative emotions and the body's biochemical response to the emotions and the thoughts. And then there is the stressor, the situation, the event, the circumstance that is contributing towards me feeling the way that I do. And the stressor can be, for example, an exam, could be a divorce, death of a loved one, moving house, loss of a job. So any kind of situation where there is any degree of a lack of control over, where I feel, as intimated earlier on, feelings of frustration. These are known as stresses and they contribute towards the experience of stress. Sudden and severe stress generally produces increase in heart rate, and the reason for that is there is a release of stress hormones within the system, amongst others that are supposed to help us to become more alert, more energetic, more aware in order to take action. There's an increase in breathing, the lungs dilate, obviously to oxygenate the body in this whole process of being able to take action. There's a decrease in digestive activity. I don't feel hungry, and the reason being that the body is busy with different processes to energize me to take action. So that could also affect the digestive system. The liver releases glucose for energy. So there are a lot of processes that take place within the body in response to what's going on in my mind that contributes towards the experience of stress. As mentioned earlier, there are two types of stress. There's positive stress and there's negative stress. Positive stress is referred to as eustress, and that is when I may be aware of a challenge or a problem or a threat, but I'm able to maintain clear thinking about it. So there are processes that take place within the brain and the body that puts me in a position to take action, to protect myself or to move away from, but to deal with the situation in a logical and reasonable manner. And that could be positive in that it could protect me. Then there is distress, which is negative stress, which is overwhelming. And that is where the threat that I'm facing is really having a very, very negative impact in my life and on me, and poses major threat. And that could ultimately be more problematic. And that is referred to as distress. We're going to look at some of the causes of stress. And it is very difficult to pinpoint or define specific causes of stress, because the causes of stress are limitless. And one of the reasons being that different people can be affected in different ways by different things. Some people seem to be able to cope more with challenges, while other people seem to be able to cope less so, for whatever the reason may be. So, as I said, there are a huge number of causes for stresses. So it's more a matter of, for me to identify what the factors are that contribute towards stress in my life and what it is that I can do about it. Although there are a number of external causes, it's very important to understand that the primary cause for stress is the internal meaning-making and feeling-making process. And what that means is, I face a situation, I face a threat, I face a challenge, and immediately there are thought processes that are triggered within my mind. In other words, I start to think a certain way about the situation. I tell myself a certain story about the situation, and those thoughts and those stories are largely the result of core beliefs that I may have developed throughout my life with regards to certain situations. It may be memories from the past, having gone through situations and the experiences that I had as a result. Whatever, it is important to understand that there are mental processes that take place in response to the situation that I'm facing. And that then is the meaning-making process, the meaning that I give to the situation. And then there are feeling-making processes, and that would be the body and the brain's biochemical response to the meaning I'm giving the situation. So then my narrative in response to a situation determines the level of stress that I experience. And I really want to emphasize this. It is not so much the situation that I'm facing, but it is the story that I tell myself in response to the situation that I'm facing. And that could be a reason why some people seem to be better able to deal with certain potential stresses and other people less so, because of what gets triggered inside of them when they face the situation and the story they tell themselves, and the biochemical reaction within the nervous system that creates the feelings and the emotions that will determine the level of stress. Another very important principle to understand is that there is something called hypofrontality that takes place when a person experiences stress. In other words, feelings of frustration, helplessness, hopelessness, that could translate into fear, anxiety, or anger for that matter. And that is the result of a very intense negative meaning-making process that causes large amounts of stress hormones to be released within my nervous system. And the purpose of the stress hormones is to help the body to prepare and the brain to prepare how to deal with the stresses. And the more negative my story is and the more prolonged the stress is, the more stress hormones will be released within my nervous system. And the impact on my nervous system and in my brain causes hypofrontality. And that simply means the impairment of prefrontal function. The prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that is responsible for executive functioning, logical thinking, reasoning, decision-making, evaluation. And that part of the brain is impaired when I'm stressed. And the main reason for that is, and I just want to put it in a nutshell, is that the midbrain or the limbic brain or the emotional brain plus the reptilian brain or the survival brain are activated in various processes to prepare myself for action, to protect myself from the danger and the risk, and that requires swift action, and which in a sense means there is no time for thinking. So what literally happens is when the midbrain and the reptilian brain are activated, there is a reduction in the blood supply towards the prefrontal cortex, and that impairs the prefrontal cortex functioning simply because there is no time to think. If I could use a practical, simple example that I often use, for anybody who has a fear of snakes, if you unexpectedly come across a long, thick black snake in front of you, there's very little chance that you're going to bend down, touch it, think, is this dangerous, what should I do? You're going to have a reflex reaction of fight, flight, or freeze. And the reason being that there is no time to think. You're going to have to take action because thinking might cause more harm than anything else. So the brain literally makes sure that you don't think, but that you react in response to whatever the threat may be. And that hyperfrontality is often the cause for irresponsible, reckless, irrational behavior when people feel very stressed. We're going to watch a short video that explains some of the processes that take place during the experience of stress.
Are you sleeping restlessly, feeling irritable or moody, forgetting little things, and feeling overwhelmed and isolated? Don't worry, we've all been there. You're probably just stressed out. Stress isn't always a bad thing. It can be handy for a burst of extra energy and focus, like when you're playing a competitive sport or have to speak in public. But when it's continuous, the kind most of us face day in and day out, it actually begins to change your brain. Chronic stress, like being overworked or having arguments at home, can affect brain size, its structure, and how it functions, right down to the level of your genes. Stress begins with something called the hypothalamus-pituitary adrenal axis, a series of interactions between endocrine glands in the brain and on the kidney, which controls your body's reaction to stress. When your brain detects a stressful situation, your HPA axis is instantly activated and releases a hormone called cortisol, which primes your body for instant action. But high levels of cortisol over long periods of time wreak havoc on your brain. For example, chronic stress increases the activity level and number of neural connections in the amygdala, your brain's fear center. And as levels of cortisol rise, electric signals in your hippocampus, the part of the brain associated with learning, memories, and stress control, deteriorate. The hippocampus also inhibits the activity of the HPA axis, so when it weakens, so does your ability to control your stress. That's not all though. Cortisol can literally cause your brain to shrink in size. Too much of it results in the loss of synaptic connections between neurons and the shrinking of your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that regulates behaviors like concentration, decision-making, judgment, and social interaction. It also leads to fewer new brain cells being made in the hippocampus. This means chronic stress might make it harder for you to learn and remember things, and also set the stage for more serious mental problems like depression and eventually Alzheimer's disease. The effects of stress may filter right down to your brain's DNA. An experiment showed that the amount of nurturing a mother rat provides its newborn baby plays a part in determining how that baby responds to stress later in life. The pups of nurturing moms turned out less sensitive to stress because their brains developed more cortisol receptors, which stick to cortisol and dampen the stress response. The pups of negligent moms had the opposite outcome, and so became more sensitive to stress throughout life. These are considered epigenetic changes, meaning that they affect which genes are expressed without directly changing the genetic code. And these changes can be reversed if the moms are swapped. But there's a surprising result. The epigenetic changes caused by one single mother rat were passed down to many generations of rats after her. In other words, the results of these actions were inheritable. It's not all bad news, though. There are many ways to reverse what cortisol does to your stressed brain. The most powerful weapons are exercise and meditation, which involves breathing deeply and being aware and focused on your surroundings. Both of these activities decrease your stress and increase the size of the hippocampus, thereby improving your memory. So don't feel defeated by the pressures of daily life. Get in control of your stress before it takes control of you.
So as we saw that the impact of stress can be quite devastating, especially if it is prolonged. And this is why I'm feel so strongly about creating a better understanding of what stress is, because I really believe the better I understand what I'm dealing with, the better I'm able to deal with it. There are what is called general adaptation stages. In other words, the various stages that take place within the whole process of the build-up of stress. First of all, there's the alarm stage, and that is when something happens that causes the stress. And as we said earlier, it could be the death of a loved one, could be a divorce, it could be any unexpected event that catches me off guard, that seems to come out of the blue, that I am inclined to give a negative meaning to. And what happens is this particular stress upsets homeostasis or cellular balance. It has a direct effect on my biology, in other words. It has a direct effect on the chemical and electrical processes within my body. And again, as I've mentioned before, the reason for that is the meaning-making process, what goes on in my mind, the story I'm telling myself, the narrative, the thoughts about it, that trigger chemical reactions within my nervous system that creates my feelings and my emotions. And the more I focus on the problem, the more the body responds biochemically by releasing stress hormones, and the greater the impact on my homeostasis and cellular balance. And over time, that can cause major problems within the function of my body and my brain, and ultimately contribute towards mental and physical illness. Then there is the resistance stage. In other words, the body starts to take action to protect itself from whatever the stressor may be. So the body fights back by adjusting to the stress. In other words, it reacts chemically, it reacts bioelectrically to match up to whatever the stress is in order to act. And that again is the release of stress hormones that cause bioelectrical processes that will cause certain processes within the body and ultimately lead to certain behaviors. Then there's the exhaustion stage. And the exhaustion stage is the result of the intense processes that take place within the brain and the body that uses up a lot of energy. So rest permits enhanced adaptation. So if I go through a situation or an experience that serves as a stress or a trigger for me to experience stress, it is hugely important for me to practice self-care during that time, to do what I need to do to look after myself, because rest permits enhanced adaptation. It helps the body to respond in healthy ways and do what needs to be done in order for me to address it. Whereas if I don't rest, it can cause, for example, overtraining, injury, and that ultimately causes a lack of adaptation. In other words, if I push myself and I don't take time out during this whole process, because sometimes stresses could be ongoing for whatever reason, there may be no immediate resolution to the situation. So it's really important that while I go through various processes, that I also look after my mind and my body, and that I prevent the exhaustion stage, because the exhaustion stage is what could lead to burnout, and that could also exacerbate physical and mental health issues. And it could really have a very negative impact on me physically and mentally if I don't take care of myself. I particularly use the phrase personal responsibility here. And that is in relation to what can I do? Because I think we've developed a pretty clear picture now of the potential negative impact of stress when we face situations or stresses that causes a negative story, a negative narrative. And by the way, there isn't necessarily anything wrong with the narrative or the story. It may be very true. The point here is to understand that it is not so much the stressor, but it is the meaning that I give to the stressor that causes the feeling, that causes the chemical reactions, that cause the emotions. And that could set the whole process of stress in motion with regards to the impact on the brain and the body. So that kind of understanding is really important, in that what do I do now to deal with stress? What is my responsibility? Now, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on which way you look at it, we've developed a culture of quick fixes, looking for quick solutions. And unfortunately, as far as I'm concerned, my view on it is people tend to go more for medical treatment and medication as opposed to take personal responsibility. Is there a room for medical intervention and medication? Absolutely. Is there room for psychiatric and psychological intervention? Absolutely. Those are very, very important factors. However, I firmly believe that those should be secondary to me taking personal responsibility and start to think, what can I do to deal with whatever challenge it is that I'm facing? What can I do to address the stress? There is something called the placebo effect. Some people will be able to experience relief from taking the sugar tablets, and that is called the placebo effect, in that what goes on in the individual's mind at the time determines whether they experience relief. So the individual may believe that the tablet that he or she is using is a pain reliever, and the body responds to that belief, and a sugar tablet can bring relief. And there is the nocebo effect, which is the opposite. So it is really important to understand that whatever treatment it is that I may be undergoing, whether it be psychiatric or psychological or psychopharmacological treatment, in other words, medication, it is important that I first start with what goes on inside of me, with my thinking, my narrative, the story I'm telling myself. In other words, my meaning-making and feeling-making processes, because that will either enhance whatever other modalities that I may be utilizing, or it may impair the effectiveness of that. So we're going to look at what we can do in taking personal responsibility to deal with stress. We're going to start with balanced nutrition. Nutrition plays a very important role, in that eating healthy not only makes me feel physically strong, but it also makes me feel emotionally and mentally good. It makes me feel alert. It makes me feel energized. It's got a huge impact. And if I feel strong, I feel energized, I feel good, it is much easier to address stresses or situations that may cause stress otherwise. Mindfulness practices, meditation, mindfulness, very important, in that it helps me to focus on the present moment, because most stress is caused by negative memories from the past or anxiety about the future. And very often there is very little or nothing taking place in the present moment that may elicit feelings of stress. So mindfulness helps me to focus on this present moment, which brings a sense of calmness, a sense of peace, and very often relief. Plus, it also causes the release of a neurotransmitter called serotonin in the brain. And serotonin is the chemical that makes me feel this sense of calmness and a sense of contentment. So mindfulness practices are very important, and there are so many free downloadable programs from the internet that I could use. Physical activity is hugely important, in that it helps to build energy within the body. It helps to oxygenate the body. It increases circulation in the body, and also the release of a whole range of feel-good chemicals. If I enjoy the physical activity, it releases dopamine, and dopamine is the pleasure chemical that makes me feel good. It releases endorphins, which is the chemical that causes the so-called natural high. I feel good emotionally and mentally when I exercise. And afterwards, when I've enjoyed what I've done, I feel good about what I've done. I can feel good about the fact that I help myself by doing it. And that is the release of serotonin. So physical exercise is a very important and helpful factor in the quest of addressing stress. The quality of sleep is very important. Now, this could be like a feedback loop. I am in a stressful situation, which means that my nervous system is releasing a large amount of stress hormones, which causes me to have difficulty in sleeping, which makes me feel negative, and you've got that cycle going. So it's really important to find ways and means to improve my quality of sleep, or my ability to sleep. And even there, nutrition, mindfulness exercises, and the physical exercises can contribute towards improving my sleep. And then there is supportive relationships, talking to people, spending time with people that help me, that are there for me, that I can be supported by, who are not going to judge me or who are not going to criticize me. So it makes me feel safe. So it's really important to work on that, to find that kind of support, to be able to share. And then mental health care, to talk to a mental health profession, whether it be counseling or coaching or whatever it may be, where I can just give a voice to what's going on inside of me and develop a different perspective and get some healthy input. And these are referred to as stress busters, in that they contribute hugely towards my ability to address stress and ultimately to create a better quality of life, where I can feel more in control. Because when I start to feel better physically, when I start to feel more peaceful mentally, when I feel rested, when I feel supported by others, when I'm able to share with somebody and get positive feedback, that makes me feel strong. And I'm more able to effectively deal with whatever the challenge is that I'm dealing with, whatever the situation is that is serving as the stressor that is causing the feelings of stress. There are certain techniques or tools or modalities that are also very effective. The one is called CBT, cognitive behavior therapy. And a professional obviously can help with it. But it's important to understand that I've already intimated to some of the CBT processes. There is an event that takes place. I think certain thoughts about this event. So what I think affects how I feel and how I act. My thoughts create my emotions, because my thinking causes a biochemical reaction in my nervous system. And if it's positive thinking, positive chemicals are released, I feel positive. If it's negative thinking, negative chemicals are released and I feel negative, and that in turn affects the way that I think and act. And ultimately, my thoughts and my emotions will lead to my behavior. What we do affects how we think think and feel, and this contributes towards this feedback loop, or the cycle that we perpetuate. Our thinking creating our feelings creating the behavior, and that keeps this whole process going. So if I can understand the role that my thoughts play, if I can find ways and means to address my thinking, it's going to have a direct impact on my emotions, and it's going to have a direct impact on my behavior, and that's going to have a direct impact on my mental and emotional state, which in turn will have a huge impact in my ability to deal with stress. I referred to narrative a couple of times, the story that I'm telling myself about what is happening. And we're going to look at a very powerful but very simple tool that was developed by a neuroscientist called Dr. Mark Waldman. And it's called the 10-10 communication game. And Dr. Mark Waldman says that when we face a stressor, a negative situation, we are inclined to tell ourselves a very long and negative story about what is going on. And the longer the story becomes, the more negative words we use, the more it has an impact on my biochemical reaction within my nervous system. More stress hormones are being released and I feel negative. And the more I try to feel better, the less I'm able to do so, because I've got this whole cycle in process through negative thinking causing negative emotions. So he says, find a way to reframe the story or make the story shorter by using as close to 10 words as possible using 10 fingers. So how this works is I cut the story down to 10 words, 10 fingers, using 1 word per finger. Let's use an example. I may have had an altercation with somebody I care deeply about that is causing me negative emotions, that causing me stress. And my story may be, oh my goodness, how could Chris talk to me like that? How could he treat me like that? I thought we were friends after everything I've done for him. This is how he treats me. This is how he disrespects me. I feel so hurt. I don't know what I'm going to do. And I feel depressed, anxious, and maybe even suicidal after a few days of this kind of narrative. How can I reframe the narrative, cut the story down to a clinical, factual version of what happened by using as close to 10 words as possible, using 1 word per finger? So I reframe the story. Finger 1, word 1. Finger 2, word 2. Chris said something to me yesterday that made me feel sad. 11 words, 11 fingers, close enough. So those 11 words means less negative words. The story is shorter. Immediately there is a direct impact on my nervous system's biochemical reaction to the story. There is a reduction in stress hormones, and at least I feel less stressed. And when I feel less stressed, I am more clear-minded, and I am better able then maybe to address the situation, as opposed to being all overwhelmed emotionally, experiencing hypofrontality, the inability to think clearly. And then there is an additional challenge. Try and cut the story down to 5 words, 5 fingers. So Chris said something to me. That's all that happened. Chris said something. The rest was the meaning I gave to the situation that caused the feeling and caused the stress. A very, very powerful tool, powerful process. So in conjunction with CBT, understanding that the situation I experience as a result of my thinking about the situation that caused my emotions, that caused my reaction, that perpetuates the feelings of stress. I understand how that works, and I now take personal responsibility by reframing the story with regards to whatever the stressor is that I'm facing, and I make the story more clinical and reduce the number of words. It will have a positive impact on my stress levels in that it reduces the amount of stress hormones and relieves the feelings of stress. And in addition to nutrition and physical exercise and mindfulness processes and finding support, it must have an impact on my experience. And sometimes we're able to address the stresses in that we can take practical action to make the situation go away or change the situation. And sometimes there's nothing that can make the situation go away. For example, the death of a loved one. But as we process our personal experience by using some of the tools that we've addressed, immediately it will have an impact on my stress levels. And just the fact that I was able to take personal responsibility already makes me feel better as well. And I am then able to address whatever is causing the stress. And I'm able to improve my quality of life as a result. That is the end of our presentation. If you found some value in this presentation, and as I said in the beginning, if you've got some questions, you are more than welcome to direct that to me at john.ttklife@gmail.com, and I will be more than willing to endeavor to answer your questions, or if there's any kind of feedback, I will appreciate that. I wish you all the best on your journey of personal exploration and personal discovery, and continuing to learn how to design the life that you desire and deserve. All the best.